A woman at the front table laughed and lifted her glass. My sister spent her whole life in the army and has absolutely nothing to show for it. The room laughed with her. A few people nodded. Nobody looked at me. Nobody disagreed. What hurt wasn't the joke. It was how easily everyone accepted it. I sat there listening as my own family treated my entire life like a punchline, and for a moment I wondered if silence had been a mistake. Then I looked around the room. My niece said nothing. My relatives said nothing. The guests smiled politely and moved on. And somehow that hurt more than the insult itself. Looking back, that was the exact moment everything began to unravel. Not because of what my sister said, but because of what she didn't know. She had just made a mistake so enormous that before the evening ended, the entire room would see her very differently. At the time, none of us knew it. Not my sister. Not the guests. Not even the man who had just walked into the ballroom. There were already too many unanswered questions. Why was I staying so calm? Why had I never defended myself all these years? Why did a single comment seem to bother one stranger more than it bothered me? Why did he keep staring in my direction? What had he recognized? And why did the expression on his face look less like surprise and more like fear? A few minutes later, something from my past would quietly resurface. Not a name. Not a title. Not an achievement. Just a few words that nobody else in the room understood. Words that would change the entire atmosphere of the night. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Because the next part of this story begins with a stranger who couldn't stop looking at me. And with a question that would force me to confront a part of my life I thought had been buried forever. But to understand how that night changed everything, I need to take you back to where it really began. Victoria smiled like she had been waiting all evening for the room to belong completely to her. You know, Rachel was in the army for years, she said, lifting her glass. And somehow, after all that time, she still came home with no stories worth telling. A few people laughed. Someone near the front said, maybe she signed the wrong forms. Victoria laughed harder. I kept my hands folded in my lap. That was something I had learned long ago. When people need a reaction from you, silence disappoints them more than anger ever could. But silence does not mean it doesn't hurt. Victoria turned toward me with that bright public smile of hers. I'm joking, Rachel. You know that. Of course, I said. My voice was calm enough that some people probably thought I did not care. Across the room, the man who had walked in earlier was not laughing. I noticed him because everyone else was. He stood near the side of the ballroom with one hand wrapped around a glass of water, watching me as if he were trying to place my face inside an old memory. Victoria did not notice him yet. She was too busy enjoying herself. Some people build companies, she said. Some people build reputations. Rachel built privacy. That got another laugh. My niece Sarah looked down at her plate. She did not laugh. But she did not speak either. That small silence hurt more than Victoria's words. Then one of the event assistants came over and whispered something to Victoria. She glanced at the seating chart and gave a soft, embarrassed little laugh. Oh, Rachel, I hope you don't mind, she said. The front tables are getting crowded. There's an open chair near the back. Everyone heard her. No one objected. I picked up my small purse and moved. The chair near the back was beside a service door, close enough to hear plates being stacked in the hallway. It was the kind of seat people gave you when they wanted you present but not visible. I sat down anyway. That was when the man took one step forward. Not much. Just enough for me to see concern cross his face. Victoria raised her voice again from the front. I admire service, truly, she said. But let's be honest. At some point, a person has to ask what all those years were worth. The room went quiet for half a second. Then someone chuckled. Victoria looked directly at me. My sister wasted her life in the army. The words landed cleanly. Not loud. Not cruel in the obvious way. Worse than that. They sounded practiced. I felt something tighten beneath my ribs, but I did not move. Then a sharp sound cracked through the room. The man near the wall had dropped his glass of water. People turned. Victoria frowned. He barely seemed to notice the broken glass at his feet. His eyes stayed fixed on me. His face had gone pale. Not surprised. Pale. As if he had just seen someone he thought no longer existed. He whispered something I could not hear. Then he looked at me and took another step closer. It can't be her, he said. Victoria gave an uneasy laugh. Do you know my sister? The man did not answer her. He looked only at me. For the first time that night, I felt my calm begin to slip. Then he asked quietly, Do you remember me? And I knew the evening had crossed a line it could not uncross. For a moment, I did not answer him. Daniel Brooks stood 3 feet away from me with broken glass still glittering near the wall behind him, and the entire room waited as if my answer might explain everything. Do you remember me? He asked again. His voice was quiet. Too quiet for a man who had just drawn every eye in the ballroom. I looked at his face longer than I should have. The gray hair was new. The lines around his mouth were deeper. But the eyes were the same. Some faces do not come back all at once. They return in pieces. I remember enough, I said. Daniel swallowed. Victoria laughed lightly from the front table. Well, this is dramatic, she said. Rachel, I didn't know you had admirers. A few people laughed because they were trained to laugh when Victoria gave them permission. I lowered my eyes. That was Victoria's talent. She could take any uncomfortable moment and turn it into a joke before anyone had time to ask why it felt wrong. Honestly, she continued, Rachel has always been mysterious. Even as a girl. Never explained herself. Never corrected anyone. You could say anything about her, and she'd just sit there like a statue. She meant it as another joke. But it was also the truth. For years, she had built a version of me that the family found easy to understand. Quiet. Unmarried. Retired. Awkward at gatherings. Useful when someone needed a spare chair filled. Forgettable when people took photographs. That was the Rachel she knew. Or rather, the Rachel she preferred. Sarah shifted in her seat. Mom, she said softly. Victoria ignored her. No, really, she said. You all remember Thanksgiving 10 years ago. Rachel disappeared halfway through dinner because someone asked about her job. A cousin near the front chuckled. I remember that, he said. Victoria smiled wider. See? Always running from simple questions. I kept my face still, but something inside me tightened. Not because the story was false. Because it was close enough to the truth to hurt. Daniel did not laugh. Sarah looked from him to me, then back to her mother. Why does that man keep staring at Aunt Rachel? She asked. That was the first time the room seemed to shift. Just slightly. Victoria paused. Daniel looked away. And I felt the air around us change. He stepped closer, but not enough to make a scene. There are things, he said carefully, that should not be discussed in a room like this. Victoria tilted her head. What things? Daniel's eyes stayed on mine. For one terrible second, I thought he might say it. He almost did. I saw the word forming behind his lips, saw the old memory rise into his face like smoke under a door. Then he stopped himself. "Not here," he said. His hand trembled around the empty napkin he had picked up. "Not yet." That should have ended it. It did not. Because once one person looks at you like a ghost, other people begin looking too. I noticed an older woman at the far end of the ballroom stand up suddenly after seeing Daniel near me. She did not excuse herself. She simply pushed her chair back and walked toward the hallway. Before she disappeared, she glanced at me. It was not curiosity. It was recognition. Then, a man near the bar turned his face away the moment our eyes met. I felt cold spread through my chest. Daniel was not the only one who knew something. Victoria noticed the movement now. "What is going on?" she asked. No one answered. I reached for my purse, pretending to check for a tissue, but my hand went straight to my phone. The screen lit up. 3 words. They confirmed attendance. I stared at the message longer than I should have. For the first time that evening, my calm failed me. I deleted it immediately. But Daniel had seen my face change. His eyes sharpened. He knew. Across the ballroom, Victoria was still trying to regain control. "Rachel," she said, forcing a smile, "are we supposed to be impressed by all this silence?" I put my phone away. Daniel leaned just close enough for only me to hear. "Then they're coming," he whispered. And in that moment, I understood something I had tried very hard not to understand. The evening was no longer about my sister's jokes. It was no longer about a bad seat, a cruel room, or an old humiliation dressed up as family humor. Something I had buried for years had started moving toward that ballroom. And once it arrived, no one in that room would be able to pretend they did not see me anymore. I left the ballroom before Victoria could make another joke. Not quickly. Not dramatically. I simply stood, excused myself, and walked toward the side hallway with the same slow steps I had used for most of my life when I needed to keep my hands from shaking. Behind me, I could hear the party trying to restart. A soft laugh. A fork against a plate. Victoria's voice rising again, smoother now, as if she could cover the crack that had opened in the room by talking over it. But I was not hurt because she had insulted me. I had lived long enough to know people reveal themselves when they think the room belongs to them. What unsettled me was Daniel Brooks. The way his face changed. The way other guests began looking away. The way the past seemed to have found the exact address of that ballroom. I stopped near a quiet window in the hallway and pressed one hand against the cool marble ledge. For a few seconds, I let myself breathe. Then I heard his voice behind me. "Rachel." I closed my eyes. "Daniel." He stepped closer, but not too close. That careful distance told me he remembered more than I wanted him to. "Do you really remember me?" he asked. I looked at him then. "Enough." His mouth tightened. "That means yes." "It means I remember a place," I said. "And I remember faces." "Yours came back late." His eyes lowered for a moment, and suddenly he did not look like a guest at a formal event. He looked like a man standing in front of a door he had avoided for years. "I thought you were gone," he said. "A lot of people did." He nodded slowly. Then he said the one thing I had hoped he would not say. "Did they ever tell you about the survivor file?" The words hit harder than Victoria's insult ever could have. I turned sharply. "Don't." Daniel froze. For the first time that night, my voice was not soft. It was low. "Warning. Don't say that here." His face changed again. Not fear this time. Regret. So it was real, he whispered. I looked past him toward the ballroom doors. A waiter walked by carrying empty glasses. Two women stood near the entrance pretending not to listen. The hallway was no longer private. It was never supposed to become a story, I said. Daniel's eyes stayed on mine. But it did. No, I said. People made it one. His breathing was shallow now. I saw your face when I said it. Then forget what you saw. I can't. That was the problem with certain memories. You can bury them, lock them, outlive them, even build an entire quiet life around never speaking of them. But if someone else carried the same memory, it was never truly yours to bury. Daniel looked older under the hallway lights. You're still carrying it, aren't you? I almost laughed, but there was no humor in me. Everyone carries something. Not like that. I looked down at my hands. They were steady again, but I knew better than to trust that. Sometimes the body behaves only because the heart has gone numb. Before I could answer, a soft murmur drifted from the ballroom. Then another. Someone had repeated the words. Survivor file. I heard them pass from one guest to another like a match being carried through dry grass. Daniel turned toward the sound. I did too. Through the open doorway, I saw Victoria standing near the front table, still smiling. Then one of the guests leaned toward her and whispered something. Her smile stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Her eyes moved across the room, searching. First for Daniel. Then for me. And for the first time that night, my sister looked less amused than afraid of what she had started. I should have walked away then. I should have let the hallway swallow me and gone home before the past reached the center of that room. But I stayed. Because once a buried thing has a name again, it does not stay buried for long. And what I did not know yet was that Victoria was about to dig with both hands. By the time I stepped back into the ballroom, the words had already spread farther than I wanted. Survivor file. I heard them in whispers near the bar, near the front table, even behind me as I walked past two women who immediately stopped talking. People do that when they know they have been caught listening. They look away too quickly. An older guest near the aisle set his wine glass down with both hands. Wait, he said. Daniel turned toward him. The man looked at Daniel first, then at me. I heard that name more than 20 years ago. No one spoke after that. He seemed to regret saying it the moment it left his mouth. His face tightened, and the people beside him went still. Victoria saw it all. That was when her curiosity sharpened into suspicion. What exactly is this survivor file? She asked. Her voice was light, but not relaxed. I said nothing. Daniel did not answer either. Victoria looked at me then, and I recognized that expression. It was the same expression she used when a business rival said something she could not control. Rachel, she said, since everyone suddenly seems fascinated, why don't you explain it? No. The answer came out before I softened it. A few heads turned. Victoria blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. For the first time all evening, my refusal was public. That should have warned her. Instead, it embarrassed her. And embarrassed people with too much pride often reach for cruelty. Victoria gave the room a small laugh. Well, that's convenient, she said. A mysterious file. A dramatic stranger. And Rachel refuses to explain any of it. Someone near her nodded. I saw the shift happen. Small, but real. A few people who had been curious began to look doubtful. Victoria noticed that too, and it gave her courage. Maybe this is what happens, she said, when someone spends years wanting to be interesting. Sarah's head lifted. Mom. Sarah looked toward me. For a moment, she seemed ready to say something. Then she looked away. Victoria ignored her. No, let me say this plainly. My sister has always lived in the shadow of other people's achievements. Mine. Our family's. Anyone's. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were true. Because she wanted them to be. I looked at Sarah then. Just once. She saw me. I know she did. Her hands tightened around her napkin, and her face changed with the effort of choosing what to do. But she stayed silent. That silence was the part one remembered later. Not the laughter. Not the insult. The silence. It has a weight when it comes from someone young enough to still know better. Questions began circling Daniel after that. How do you know her? What did you mean earlier? Was this from her military days? Daniel's jaw tightened. It's not my story to tell. Victoria smiled, but there was fear underneath it now. How respectful, she said. Apparently everyone here knows some grand secret except Rachel's own family. A woman near the back repeated the words again. Survivor file. This time, more people heard it. The room shifted toward me. Not physically, but in attention. I could feel it, the way you feel a storm turning before the first branch breaks. Victoria felt it too. For the first time all night, she was no longer the center of the room. And she hated it. She turned to me, her smile gone thin. If you had truly done anything worth remembering, Rachel, don't you think your own family would have known? That was the line. Not because it was the cruelest. Because it was the oldest. It was the belief I had allowed them to keep for years because correcting it would have cost too much. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I had survived worse rooms than this one. But somehow, this room hurt differently. Daniel pushed his chair back. The sound was quiet, but everyone heard it. He stood slowly. Enough, he said. Victoria looked relieved for half a second, as if she thought he was going to support her. He did not. Daniel looked straight at her. His voice was calm, but something old and wounded moved beneath it. You have absolutely no idea who your sister is. The room went so still I could hear the service door swing shut behind me. And I knew then that whatever I had spent years hiding was no longer mine to keep hidden. No one moved after Daniel spoke. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. Earlier, people had been embarrassed. Now they were listening. Victoria held her smile for 1 second too long. Then explain it, she said. If you know so much about my sister, explain it. Daniel looked at me first. He did not ask permission out loud, but I understood the question in his eyes. I gave him no answer. Because I did not have one. Part of me wanted him to stop. Another part knew that stopping would only let Victoria turn the silence into another weapon. Daniel turned back to the room. I spent years wondering if she was even alive, he said. A murmur moved across the tables. Alive. That word changed things. People can dismiss secrecy. They can laugh at silence. But when a stranger says he wondered whether someone was alive, laughter becomes much harder. Victoria's face shifted. What are you talking about? Daniel did not raise his voice. That made everyone listen harder. I'm talking about a woman your family treated tonight like she had nothing worth remembering. A man near the bar leaned forward. How many people know this story? No one answered. Then, from the back of the room, another older man slowly raised his hand. More than you think. Victoria looked at him sharply. You know her too? The man did not answer her. He only looked at me with a kind of tired sadness I had seen before. The kind carried by people who survived something and never found a clean way to speak about it. My stomach tightened. I knew then that the room was changing faster than I could control. Daniel took a breath. There are parts of her past, he said, that were never supposed to be discussed in public. Convenient, Victoria said. No, Daniel replied. Protected. That single word made the room still again. Protected. I closed my eyes for a moment. That was the question I had feared most. Not whether people believed me. Not whether Victoria would be embarrassed. I feared what would happen if something sealed for a reason became entertainment for a room full of people. Daniel looked toward the doors. And she is not the only one who remembers. Victoria's control slipped another inch. Who else is coming? This time, Daniel did not answer. I saw him glance toward the hotel entrance. So did I. A few seconds later, the doors opened. An older man stepped inside, tall, straight-backed, carrying a leather folder against his chest. He moved slowly, but every person near the doorway made room for him without knowing why. I knew him before I saw his face clearly. There are people your past keeps in reserve, waiting for the one night you need them and dread them at the same time. Victoria whispered, "Who is that?" Daniel smiled for the first time all evening. Not with joy. With recognition. The man stopped near the center aisle. His eyes found mine immediately, and for a second, the years between then and now seemed to disappear. My breath caught. He held up the folder just slightly. Not enough for the whole room to see what was inside. Just enough for me to understand. Before we go further, if this story has held you this far, stay with me now, because what happens next changes everything. The man walked toward us. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even Victoria seemed unable to find a sentence. He stopped beside Daniel, looked at me, and his voice broke the quiet. I never thought I'd see Phantom again. And that was the moment the past finally entered the room. The room stayed silent long after the word left his mouth. Phantom. No one understood it yet. But everyone understood it mattered. The man holding the leather folder stepped forward and stopped beside Daniel. His eyes never left mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel turned toward the room. Many years ago, he said quietly, I was one of several people who believed we would never make it home. No one interrupted. Even Victoria seemed afraid to. Daniel glanced at me. I never expected to see Rachel again either. A knot tightened in my chest. I had spent years making sure those parts of my life stayed where they belonged. Far away. Buried. But some stories do not stay buried when enough people carry them. Daniel continued. When people talk about survival, they usually remember the ones who came back. He paused. They rarely remember the people who made that possible. The room listened. Then he said the words that changed everything. I owe my life to her. Several guests exchanged looks. Victoria stared at him. What does that even mean? Daniel ignored the question. For the first time all evening, people were no longer looking at Victoria for answers. They were looking at me. Emma stepped closer to her father. You knew her before tonight? Daniel nodded. Not through the news. Not through the military. Then how? His eyes moved toward the leather folder. There was a record. Emma frowned. What record? The older man beside him opened the folder. Slowly. Carefully. The way someone handles something that still carries weight after decades. A file, Daniel said. A file that documented people who survived events most of the public never heard about. A quiet murmur moved through the ballroom. Victoria folded her arms. This sounds ridiculous. But her voice lacked conviction. The older man removed a document from the folder and placed it on a nearby table. The paper was old. Protected inside a clear sleeve. Not a rumor. Not a story. A document. The room noticed the difference immediately. The survivor file was real, the man said. Every eye turned toward him. For years I had imagined this moment. And somehow it felt stranger than I expected. Daniel looked at me. I could see the apology in his face. Not for speaking. For speaking publicly. There were operations, he said carefully, that never became public knowledge. Victoria laughed nervously. Then why has nobody heard of them? Because that was how she measured truth. If the public knew it, it mattered. If they did not, it didn't. Daniel answered before anyone else could. Because some things were protected. The same word again. Protected. The room absorbed it differently this time. Not as a mystery. As a fact. Then Daniel looked directly at me. You were there. I said nothing. For once, I did not need to. The folder spoke louder than I ever would. The older man turned another page. Several names appeared beneath official markings. Daniel pointed toward them. I'm not the only person listed. A few guests leaned forward. Daniel ran a finger across the page. There were 32 names in that file. The room stayed silent. 29 of those people made it home. Nobody moved. Not one of them had ever forgotten it. And every one of them knew the same name. His eyes lifted toward me. Phantom. One of the names caused another man near the back to raise his hand. I remember him. Another voice answered. So do I. The room shifted again. One witness had become several. One story had become evidence. Thomas Reed, the journalist, lowered his phone and stared at the page. This isn't one person's memory anymore. No, Daniel said. It never was. Victoria's confidence was fading visibly now. She looked at me as though searching for the version of Rachel she thought she knew. The quiet sister. The forgotten sister. The woman who sat in the back of the room. That version was disappearing. One piece at a time. A woman near the front table spoke softly. If all of this is true, why didn't she ever tell anyone? Daniel smiled sadly. Because she never wanted recognition. Several people lowered their eyes. I noticed Sarah do the same. That hurt more than I expected. Because for the first time, she was beginning to understand. The older man closed the folder and stepped aside. Another voice came from the doorway. Deep. Familiar. Certain. The room stayed quiet. Nobody seemed quite sure what to do with the information they had just heard. Several guests looked back toward the file. Others looked at me. Not with curiosity anymore. With disbelief. As if they were trying to reconcile the woman who had spent the evening alone near the service door with the person Daniel was describing. Colonel James Whitaker. I had not seen him in years. He walked into the room with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Victoria looked relieved. As if she believed someone important had finally arrived to settle the confusion. The colonel stopped beside me. Then he faced the room. Everything you've heard tonight is true. The room went silent again. The file exists. The witnesses exist. And Rachel Mercer was at the center of events most people will never fully understand. No one questioned him. No one laughed. No one looked at Victoria. The colonel turned toward her. His expression was not angry. That somehow made it worse. You never knew your sister. Victoria looked as if someone had removed the floor beneath her feet. Then the question everyone had been holding finally surfaced. A man near the back asked it first. If all this is true, why does he keep calling her Phantom? The room focused on Daniel. He took a slow breath. Then he looked at me. Not for permission. For respect. That's not her name, he said. Silence. That's what the survivors called her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Daniel's voice softened. For years, people in that file kept repeating the same story. The woman who appeared when things were hopeless. The woman who never stayed long enough to be thanked. The woman many of us believed we'd never see again. His eyes met mine. Phantom. For years, people in that file had disagreed about details. Dates. Locations. Names. But there had been one thing they never disagreed on. Who brought them home? The word settled over the ballroom. And for the first time all night, nobody saw me as Victoria's forgotten sister. They saw me as someone they had never truly known. I looked toward Victoria. Her face had gone pale. The evening she had controlled from the first toast was collapsing around her. And the worst part for her was simple. No one was listening to her anymore. For the first time that evening, people weren't asking Victoria questions. They were asking about Rachel. The room had quietly chosen whose story mattered. Victoria tried to laugh. It came out too thin. Well, she said, looking around the room, this has certainly become much more dramatic than I expected. No one laughed with her. That was the first time I saw fear move across my sister's face. Not fear of danger. Fear of losing control. She looked toward the guests who had been smiling with her only minutes earlier. Their eyes were no longer warm. They were measuring her now, remembering every word she had said before the truth began to surface. I was teasing, Victoria said. Everyone knows that. A man near the front table spoke before anyone else could. Would you have said those things if you knew? Victoria opened her mouth. Then closed it. That question did more damage than any accusation could have. Because everyone in the room already knew the answer. The older man with the leather folder placed several pages on the table, careful not to expose more than necessary. Even in that moment, he respected the limits of what should remain protected. The file existed for a reason, he said. There were people involved. Survivors. Families. Operations that could not be made public. Someone whispered, so it wasn't just him? Daniel answered quietly. No. He looked at me. It was many of us. That was when the room finally understood that this was not a story invented for sympathy. It was not a dramatic exaggeration. It was a protected record of lives that had crossed mine in ways my family had never imagined. And with that understanding, something changed in how people looked at Victoria. They were no longer simply surprised. They were ashamed for having laughed. Sarah stood slowly from her chair. Victoria noticed immediately. Sarah, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. But Sarah did not go to her mother. She walked across the room and stopped beside me. She did not touch my arm. She did not make a speech. She simply stood there. And that small movement said more than any apology could have. Daniel looked at her, then back at me. There are things you remember because they hurt you, he said. And there are things you remember because someone kept you alive long enough to feel anything at all. His voice broke slightly. I remembered Rachel because every year I got to see my daughter grow older. I knew there was a reason I had that year. Emma covered her mouth. For the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. Daniel turned toward the room. She was the reason many of us came home. Another man near the back slowly nodded. So was I. A woman beside him raised her hand. And me. Then a third voice answered from another table. The room realized Daniel had never been speaking only for himself. No one spoke. I felt the attention in the room shift again. But this time it did not feel like suspicion. It felt like respect. People who had ignored me at the beginning of the evening now looked at me differently. A woman who had laughed at Victoria's joke lowered her eyes. A man who had moved past me earlier without speaking gave me a small, embarrassed nod. Victoria stood alone near the front table. That was her punishment before anyone named it. Not public shouting. Not revenge. Isolation. She had spent the whole evening making sure I felt small in front of everyone. Now everyone could see her clearly. She took one step toward me. "Rachel," she said. I did not answer. There was no anger left in me. Only a tired kind of sadness. The kind that comes when a person finally sees the damage they caused but only because others are watching. Victoria's voice lowered. "Please wait." The room seemed to hold its breath. I knew what they wanted. Some wanted me to forgive her. Some wanted me to humiliate her. Some wanted a clean ending, the kind people can understand quickly. But real life rarely gives you that. I looked at my sister, then at Sarah standing beside me, then at Daniel, whose face still carried years of memory. For most of my life, I had believed silence was the safest place to stand. That night, I learned silence can protect you. But it can also let the wrong people write your story. Victoria took another step. "Rachel." And for the first time all evening, she was the one waiting for my answer. Victoria stood in front of me with every eye in the ballroom fixed on us. For once, she did not know how to perform. Her mouth moved before the right words arrived. "Rachel," she said softly, "I didn't know." That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever heard from my sister. But even then, I noticed what she apologized for. Not for mocking me. Not for letting the room laugh. Not for moving me to the back like an afterthought. For not knowing. As if cruelty became smaller when it was based on ignorance. I looked at her for a long moment. Around us, no one interrupted. Sarah stood beside me, quiet and ashamed. Daniel had stepped back, giving me the space he had not been able to give me earlier. Victoria's voice cracked. "I really didn't know who you were." I answered calmly. "That's true." Her eyes filled, but I did not rush to comfort her. There are moments when kindness becomes another way of erasing what happened. And I did not want to erase it. I only wanted the truth to stand there long enough for everyone to see it. Victoria lowered her head. "I'm sorry." The room waited for me to do what rooms always expect women to do. Soften. Smile. Make everyone comfortable again. But I had spent too many years making other people comfortable with the wrong version of me. I looked at my sister and said, "I don't need revenge, Victoria." For a second, she looked relieved. Then she realized forgiveness was not the same thing as undoing what had happened. The room would remember. And so would she. She looked up. "I only needed you to stop pretending silence meant failure." That was all. No speech. No punishment. No raised voice. Just the one truth I should have said years earlier. Sarah wiped her eyes. How did you stay silent for so long? She asked. I turned to her. Because sometimes silence keeps other people safe. Then I looked back at Victoria. But sometimes it lets the wrong people tell your story. Sarah nodded slowly. I think she understood more than I expected her to. That night did not repair my family. Stories like this rarely end that neatly. Victoria and I did not hug in front of everyone. The guests did not burst into applause. Daniel did not turn the past into a celebration. The room simply changed. People looked at me differently. Not because I had become someone new. Because, for the first time, they had stopped seeing only the person Victoria described. Thank you for listening to my story. And if this story leaves you with anything tonight, let it be this. Never measure a life by how loudly it is celebrated. Measure it by how deeply it changes the lives of others. If this story meant something to you, let me know where you're watching from and what part stayed with you the most. Because the people who chase recognition spend their lives trying to be remembered. The people who quietly change lives rarely have to ask.